It's great to have you all here tonight at our campfire at Camp Loll. Won't that be wonderful? A lot of things I'd like to say to you, but I think tonight I'd like to talk about preparedness. Because after all, be prepared is the motto. You know, I have a story out of my own life that I think teaches that lesson well. That was a very painful lesson for me to learn. I'm going to begin by pointing out that I am an Aggie. Graduated twice from Utah State. Love it up there. Of course, I did attend BYU. Oh yeah, and I attended the University of Utah too, and also Weber State. And come to think of it, I attended Church College of Hawaii. So I've done a lot of college, and I really enjoyed it. It's a wonderful thing to be off to school. I love school. And I'd have to tell you that there's a wonderful thing there with the great professors and teachers you work with. They're great. I had some of the best teachers that have ever lived on the face of the earth I know. I had Art Holmgreen for botany, and for history, I had George Ellsworth and William Lai. There's no way you can beat those guys. They were wonderful. They touched my life and changed me forever. But it's not just the professors. It's not just the lessons. It's not just the classes. It's the people you're with. It's the group of people you interact with. It's the synergy of learning that you share with each other. That's what changes your life. That's what makes you learn and understand. I loved it. Still do. I love school. But up at Utah State, I met an especially important man in my life. His name was Golden Steele. Now that's an interesting name for an interesting man. See, Golden Steele was a government hunter. He knew everything there was to know about wild animals, I'll tell you. Like that fellow we had up here earlier this week to help us with that troublesome bear. Golden could go out in the woods and find the tracks of a coyote where I wouldn't see the tracks of anything. He could tell you how many coyotes there were in the canyon and most likely where their den was. He knew everything. I worshipped him. I just idolized him. I thought he was perfect. I hung about him all the time, listening, asking. Oh, gee. And I guess he kind of understood that, and for some magical reason, he took a like to me, and we became friends. Oh, gee, what a treasure. That's why you go to school. And, you know, as the quarter advanced towards its end, we were sitting in botany class studying dried specimens, and Golden leaned over to me and said, "Hey, how'd you like to spend winter quarter at my trap line in the high Uintas?" Would I want to spend winter quarter trapping in the high Uintas? See, I knew that Golden ran a trap line. He had a trap line up there to take him in midwinter when the pelts were prime. You see, in the middle of the cold, the animals' coats are warmest and thickest and softest, and that's when you get the most money for them. And Golden spent the middle of every winter up there in the high Uintas trapping. And now he'd ask me to go. Of course, I had to get my parents' permission in those days. When I told Dad and Mom about my hopes, they were in agreement. They thought it would be a great way to spend a quarter. And so just after New Year's, I found myself on Golden Steele's trap line in the high Uintas. Golden had a big deserted farmhouse that we headquartered in. There in the great room, we lived most of the time. We ate our meals and slept. The rest of that house was full of everything you'd ever want to be for being an outdoorsman and a trapper, a horseman. He had a room full of the tack, you know, the saddles and everything for the horses, the hay and the feed. And in another room, he had all the hides and pelts, and in another still, the traps and all those things. Then other places, he'd stashed treasures he'd found, antlers and skulls and interesting things one finds in the forest when they wander about nonstop day after day. It was a wonderful place to be. The smell, the feel of it, to go room to room and to see so much beauty. And then to spend the day in the out of doors. It was unbelievable. What a learning experience. So great. And I had to learn a lot. No better teacher than Golden. I learned about trapping. I learned about being in the wilderness and how to behave and how to get by. One of the hardest things I had to learn was how to deal with horses. I never had much experience like that. In fact, I was a little skittish around the horses, but I had quite a string of them, and I decided on the one I wanted. I had to pick a horse that fitted me, and I did. Her name was Sally. Now, when I say fitted me, she did not fit me physically. She was a great big white horse. In fact, I was sore the entire time I worked up there with Golden because I was sprayed out across the back of that horse all day riding, but it was worth it because she was a steady horse. She would not balk or spook. She would not be upset, and that's important. Like I say, she never spooked, never but once, and that's an important part of this story. You know, I'm just going to take a second and give you a couple of incidents about what a steady horse she was. When I first started riding out there into the mountains with her, I noticed, being a new horseman, that hanging from the saddle there are all these leather thongs hanging down, these little leather danglies. I figured they were for attaching stuff to, so I had a bunch of extra traps, and so I tied them right on there, right on the back of the saddle, where they banging around right on her backside. And we rode all day, got back to camp that night, and I got ready to take off the saddle, and danged at that bunch of traps hadn't worn a hole right in her hide, about the size of a 50-cent piece. You know, she hadn't balked or complained. She hadn't thrown me off and kicked in my head the way she ought to. She'd just taken it like the great friend she was. I got another story which might be more interesting to you about a coyote. I remember one time we were heading up through the trees and looking down on a trap, and in that trap there was a coyote fresh caught. It was still alive. It was just held by the one paw, and it was pulling and jerking and snarling. And there is a market for live coyotes, and so Golden says he's going to take this one alive. He grabbed a bit of rope and some rags and slipped down off over there, and before you knew it, he had that coyote muzzled and tied just like a sack of potatoes. He hauled it up and he set it right down across that great horse's neck. He didn't put it on his own, he put it on Sally. You know, that horse didn't even look at that coyote, though it was snarling through its bit, I'll tell you itself. She never even looked at it. Might as well have been a sack of potatoes for all she cared. I'm telling you this so you'll know the kind of horse Sally was and how much it took to make this story happen. Well, as the weeks went by, we had pretty much a routine we got into. This was our routine. Every morning we'd get up before light and we'd fix the horses up, get them in the trailer, and we'd load all our gear and we'd head on up the canyon to one of many little canyons that came down in towards the towards the road. And then we'd head up those canyons. We'd go up towards on the one side, checking, resetting, and harvesting what fortune had provided, all the way to the ridge. And there we'd have our lunch, and in the afternoon we'd come on down, taking what we got from the traps on the other side, resetting them and ready, and we'd get back near dark, a little after usually, and then head on back to the farmhouse. That was the way of it every day of the week, except the Moose Creek line. Moose Creek line was a 2-day trip. It was actually 2 creeks, Big Moose Creek and Little Moose Creek, and they'd come together not far up the canyon and form Moose Creek. So our process was this: we'd go down the far side of Moose Creek till we got to the fork, and then we'd head up Big Moose Creek, zigzagging back and forth across the stream, setting and moving the traps, getting them best we could, harvesting our treasures, till we got up to the top. And there Golden had built a little cabin. It's not much bigger than this one this stage we're standing on here. And there he would have some food for us, and he had grain for the horses, had a little stove, and we'd be warm and snug. And then the next morning we'd get the horses ready and we'd head back down Little Moose Creek, zigzagging back and forth till we got to the far side of Moose Creek, and then it was down to the truck, home after dark with our treasures. Well, as the winter progressed, it turned out getting kind of warm. It's called a Chinook. A warm wind came in. It got warm and it was beautiful weather. You know, it feels like spring, but you look at the calendar and it's the dead of winter, but you don't care. You're enjoying it. And boy, were we having fun. We were having a great time. I was learning. We were talking. We were harvesting. It was great. And I remember beginning of one week, Golden says to me, you know, I've been thinking, maybe this week when it comes to the Moose Creek line, we might run it a little different. He says, when we get up there to the fork, you just keep on going by yourself. Ride on up to the cabin. Just take good care of my pelts, and I'll meet you at the top, and I'll go up backwards, up Little Moose Creek, and we'll spend the night, and then we'll come straight down in the morning. We'll have most of the day off. It'll be like a vacation. Oh boy, was I excited. Not because of the idea of a vacation. This whole thing was a vacation to me. But the idea that he trusted me. He trusted me, first of all, that I could do it. That I could survive alone in the wilderness. And then that he would trust me with his horse and his rifle and his traps and his gear and his livelihood. I was so flattered. I was so honored. I was so excited. And when that morning came, I was so disappointed. When I awoke, I could tell there had been a change in the weather. You know how you can feel when the weather changes. You feel the weight of the air as the storm comes in. Soft, warm wind to blow, and when I went out to get the horses, the stars were all gone. The thick clouds had blotted out the sky, pitch black. You could feel the weight of the coming snow. You could smell it in the air. We got everything loaded and headed on up the road. I was afraid to talk. I was afraid of getting Golden talking because I was afraid he'd say, you know, it's going to be a storm and we better stick together and we'll try this again separate another day. I didn't want that. I wanted it now, fool that I was. But I was ready for it. I wanted to prove I was ready. And you know, we didn't say a word, not even when we got to the fork. He just turned off to the left, left me to go on up to the right. Soon I headed up along the big Moose Creek line, me and Sally, in the middle of the wilderness, the weight of the storm weighing down upon us. We came to the first trap. There was nothing there, hadn't been touched, so we swung wide about it, second two. But when we came to that third trap, it was all wrong. Something had been in the trap, but it had been torn all to pieces. Everything it had but little tufts of fur and blood blushing all around on the snow. It was just terrible. I looked at it, I tried to read the tracks, but there'd been too many of them. It was all mucked up in a mess. Well, I knew the Golden wanted to look at this without me messing with it anymore, so I left it there and I headed on up. We came to the fourth set, and it's the same thing. Blood everywhere, the snow amuck with blood, but tracks everywhere, and it was eerie, it was scary, so much blood. I'm beginning to get worried. I didn't know what to do. I'm trying to figure out what steps to take next. I knew where the next trap was, though, so I figured I'd go there. It was up at the end of the draw, this little narrow draw, very steep like this, on either side, coming down like a V. And I'm riding up that bottom of that draw on Sally's back, and I noticed out the corner of my eye another set of tracks, a trail of tracks coming down at right angles, 90 degrees, to the trail I was on and going back off up the other side. Well, they didn't look right to me, so I pulled up on the reins and slid down off the horse. I pulled my rifle out of the scabbard and went down to check out those tracks. Well, I could tell by looking at them they weren't no herbivore. It wasn't an elk, wasn't a moose, it wasn't a cloven hoof. It was a clawed foot. You could tell because though it hadn't broken down through the snow, it was on top. The snow was crusted, but it had made a press in the snow, and then it had done what they call melted out. Sun shines on a track for any amount of time. It will spread. It'll make it bigger until it builds a little rind of ice up around it, like a little crown. This is a big track, and you can see the claws. You can see the toes. I didn't know what it was. I thought, well, maybe it was a bear, and I figured maybe a bear's up out of his den because it's so warm, and he's looking for something to eat. Maybe he's eating out of our traps. I think I need to tell Golden. So got back on the horse and got up out of the draw and headed up towards the next trap. Before I got there, something happened far worse than a bear. It started to snow. That big, heavy, late winter, early spring snow. You know, the flakes are like great big snowflakes you cut out of paper, falling down, and they hook together in patterns like lace, and then they land on everything. They were landing on. I had my hat on. I had a big wool jack shirt. That was keeping me warm up here, but my hands were in leather gloves, and they were no good. Now they were getting wet, and I was wearing blue jeans, and I'll tell you that's no good. It's those big wet flakes, that lace of flakes would land on that, and they'd be water soaking into the skin, and the wind blowing, and it was getting cold, and and hard to see. And I came up over on the next trap and I looked down through the trees. There was nothing there but a coyote leg, about 6 inches of it sticking straight up out of the trap. And underneath that new layer of snow, you could see the blood blush pink. Well, by this time, I realized I couldn't keep this up. My mind started telling me, he says, you got to find shelter. You got to stay put. You got to find shelter. You got to stay put. I figured Golden would want to come down and look at these traps anyway. There's no point in checking out anymore till he was with me. So that's what I do. Snow this intense, I thought to myself, storm like this, it cannot last for long. So all I got to do is I got to find some shelter. I got to stay put. I'll be all right. Build a fire. I looked around. There's a big fir tree up on the hillside. So I made my way up to that big fir tree. I broke down in along the bottom. Got down in under that tree. My dang, there wasn't even any snow under there. The ground was most bare. I reached up there. I pulled down a bunch of twigs and sticks. I built a big nest, and I reached down here around my neck. I'd left Sally outside. I'd just thrown the rain down over her face, and she turned her tail to the wind and put her head down, looking down canyon. And I'm in there crackling and popping and building myself a fire. Soon I took a match out of that little cylinder and I had a fire going. And I was warm and comfortable. And I imagine I was safe in there, inside there with my rifle in my hand. You know, you always take your rifle with you when you get off your horse. Golden taught me that. You don't get off a horse when you've been working it hard like that and leave your rifle in the scabbard. That old gal like to lay down and take a roll, and then snap, she's got your rifle stock and you don't have a rifle. So I had my rifle with me. That was a lucky thing too. When I sat there by that fire, I figured I had about 2 hours of fire. I was confident that's how much wood I had. I was confident that that snowstorm could not last more than 2 hours. The 2 hours passed, and if anything, that snowstorm was worse than it was when I went in there. But I've been thinking long and hard. As I said, I knew Golden would want to check these traps out, so I decided what I was going to do is I was just going to get on Sally. We'd head straight up the canyon to that cabin, and Golden had come, and then the next day we'd come down and see what had happened, see what was wrong. I'd check out what he'd found up Little Moose Creek. And so I decided to head out, even though it was still storming bad. I reached up, and it wasn't hard to gather in a bunch of snow, and I made out that fire cold. And then I rifle in hand, I broke up out through that cornice of snow. And I looked down at Sally. I could barely see her. She turned herself to look at me. And then something happened. Her big eyes, they splayed wide open like this, and her nostrils spread wide. And she gave a snort, and she dropped her head, and she ran off down that canyon. She ran off there and left me. She left me alone. Well, I didn't know what was wrong. I didn't know what's happened. I didn't know what to do. I said, well, I knew she was going to head for that truck. All I needed to do was to get in her trail. I'd follow her tracks back down to the truck. I fought my way over there and started down, but something terrible had happened. There'd been about a foot or more snow had fallen, and it was warm snow, if you can believe that, and it was laying on top of that cold layer of crust, and it had warmed it up and made it soft, so at every step I post-holed, I was breaking through the snow. I was swimming in deep snow, trying to get down that canyon. It didn't matter much though, because 10 minutes I couldn't find those tracks anymore. The wind was blowing, the snow falling so thick, and there were no shadows. There were no cast shadows. It was a whiteout. I couldn't see the trail. And then my mind kept telling me, it said, you got to stay put. You got to build a fire. Got to wait for help. Stay put. Build a fire. Wait for help. Well, I looked around, and there was another big fir tree. Well, it worked before, so I fought my way up. I literally fought my way up, like swimming up to that tree. I broke down in around the cornice. I pushed myself down in there. I pulled down a bunch of twigs. And the twigs were cutting my hands. Where were my gloves? I lost my gloves. How was that? I broke down a pile of twigs. I built them into a nest. I reached down around my neck for that matchbox, and it wasn't there. Now, I don't know how many of you have been scared. I mean, really scared like you're going to die. But you kind of get a brassy taste in your mouth, and your eyes ache where your tears come, and your throat aches, and your chest aches. And I couldn't think of anything except that I was going to die. I broke back up from up underneath that tree, just shaking. I started to look on down that canyon, and at that moment, all kinds of things happened. A big bunch of elk came running right in front of me. You know, when the big snows come, those big animals head down to the low pastures. And this is what this was. There's a big bull elk, still in the antlers, pushing his batch of cows down the canyon. They were running right in front of me. And I'm thinking to myself, I'm thinking fast. My first thought was, well, at least I'm not going to starve to death, which was stupid, of course, because I was never going to live to starve. But then I thought, it's not elk season. And then I thought, well, if I'm going to shoot an elk out of season, I'm going to shoot a bull and not a cow. And by that time, I had that big boy lined up in my sights, and whoa, boom! He's down in the snow, sliding down there. Those cows are off, bounding through the drifts. I walked up to him. He's stone dead. I reached into my boot, pulled out my skinning knife. So, started to skin that elk. I was more acting on reflex than on intellect, I'll tell you. I split his throat out the blood, and I started to open him up. What you always do when you're skinning a big animal like that, an elk or a deer, you got to cut with the hair. You try to cut against it, you're going to dull your knife. You're not going to get to finish. So I was doing as I was trained, because I was just not thinking. And I opened him up and got down there to belly, cut his belly open, reached in there to grab out his stomach, his intestines. Oh, it felt so good. The heat just coming up off that elk was giving me life again. And when I reached inside, my hands down into the blood, oh, it felt so good. It was burning. It was burning my hands. I could tell they were alive. It hurt. It hurt good. It made me happy. And then I got thinking as I threw his guts out into the snow, if I could just get warm, if I could just get warm for 10 minutes, then I could think. I could figure my way out of this. So I took that big skinning knife and I broke up through the brisket, right here between the ribs of that elk. I broke his chest open. I pulled out the lungs, the heart. I even ripped out his esophagus. I opened him all up clean. And this is going to sound gross to you, but it saved my life. I turned around and I put my rifle up in the antlers. And I pushed myself up inside that elk so the two flaps of hide were hanging right here in front of my face, and I lay there on my side. It was my plan to lay there 10 minutes or so till I got warm. But you know what happens when you've been cold and you're oh so tired, and suddenly you're in a comfortable place. And oh, was it comfortable? I didn't care it was crowded. I was warm. It was comfortable. Well, you know what happens? I don't know how long I was asleep, but it was hours, I know. When I woke up, at first I didn't know where I was. But then it remembered me, I'm inside an elk. I looked out through that crack. I could see everything. Beautiful white snow, moonlight shining bright, full moon, clear sky on the beautiful white snow. It was bright as day. I moved to get out of that elk, but you know what happens to an animal when it's been dead for any amount of time? It's been cold like this, my lands, it gets stiff, and I could not open that elk's rib cage. Then a minute later, I was glad I couldn't, because all of a sudden that elk, he gave a jerk. Now I knew that elk was dead because I was inside of him. But then he gave another jerk. And then just at that moment, there walked in front of me the four biggest, hairiest legs I've ever seen in my entire life. It was a great big black timber wolf. That big old wolf came in there and he grabbed a hold of the hind quarter of that elk. That's where wolves and coyotes, they always go for the hind quarters and them big tusks. He's ripping that hide out, worrying out a chunk of meat, big as he could pull, set out to start to chew it down. And then in comes this big she-wolf. She's checking it out and she grabs a hold, starts to shake it. Here they were, a pair of timber wolves up there in the Uintas. Nobody had ever reported them I'd heard of. And there they were eating towards me inside that elk. I knew I had to do something. Just then that big old he-wolf, he came around and he stood between that elk's splayed legs. And then he looks off at the moon down the canyon. And there hanging right in front of me was his tail. I didn't know what else to do. I had to get hold of the situation. So I reached out there and I grabbed his tail. I pulled it in tight up here against my chest. He starts snarling and roaring. And he's looking around like this, trying to get at me, but he can't turn enough. He can't turn enough. Then in comes that big she-wolf. She looks around. She stands there. She turns towards the canyon. And there's her tail in front of me. I grab it and I pull it in here next to my chest. I'm holding them both. Those wolves are snarling and they're a roar. They start to howl. They start running. They start running down the canyon. They're dragging that elk carcass down the canyon. And I found if I pulled hard on the right, I could steer it off to the right. If I pulled hard on the left, I could steer it off to the left. And you know, I drove that carcass right back down to the truck. And that's why I'm here tonight. And this is true.